Welcome, one and all, to a special edition of Mystic Radio. I am your host, Robin Alexis, and I'm so excited to be back with you. I thought after 19 years that we had retired Mystic Radio, but I've decided to launch a special series of Mystic Radio. I wrote a book called A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, and through a very serendipitous experience, I met Ken Sylvester, who wrote the book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof. And he and I have been having very interesting conversations, not only about the serendipity about how we met, but how we feel so compelled to share information with all of you. So here we are. We are now a Mystic Radio podcast series where in a moment I'm going to introduce you to my new friend, Ken. But before I do bring him on the show, I want to remind everyone who's been listening to Mystic Radio for the past 19 years, it is always important to remember that anything you hear on this podcast, it is up to you to discern the truth for yourself. We're not telling you what to think. We're encouraging you to know, trust, and act upon your own knowing. Welcome, Ken.
Well, welcome, Robin. It's good to talk with you again.
Yeah, this is really amazing. So I was having a conversation with someone, I think about 2 months ago, and he asked me what my book was about. And I said, it's a conversation with extraterrestrials. And he said, well, that's really weird. I just got off the call with someone else who wrote a book about UFOs. And I said, oh, really? Can I have his phone number? And the gentleman said, well, let me ask him if it's okay. And he did. And I got Ken's number and I called him. And it's like we've been friends forever. You know how it is when you meet an old soul friend, and it's just like magical. And at first, I did not want to get back on Facebook or any social media. I'd been off social media when we ended our Mystic Radio show, and I was just sort of hibernating. And Ken kept telling me all these cool things he was doing on social media to promote his best-selling book, his Amazon best-selling book. So after 23 weeks, I decided I had to get back on social media because I had to follow this guy. And so when I found him on Facebook, he's got a picture of himself with a flame coming out of the top of his head. And I thought, well, isn't that something? It takes someone with a flame coming out of the top of his head talking about UFOs to get me back on social media. And Ken is just full of stories. You're going to love meeting him, hearing about his book. He is an expert on UFOs and extraterrestrials. So, Ken, why don't you tell people about your book?
Okay, Robin. What I've done is I researched this for 2 years. I watched over 100 ancient alien shows, which totally convinced me that not only have we not been alone, but it's been thousands of years. Rather than go back and prove the past 1,000 years, I decided to do an updated version of the top 40 UFO stories. And I took those stories, and almost all 40 stories have books written about them. Some have multiple books. And I took out the backstories from them, which they needed to fill the pages. You know, you get a book, and it's 300 to 500 pages, and they have to fill it up with some. So they fill it up with a backstory. So I took that out and got down to the cold, hard facts and started with that. And then through my research, a lot has happened since Roswell 75 years ago, or even just in the last couple of years. I was able to obtain some documentaries that were recently done in 2022 and some in 2024. So I have quite a bit of updated information. The rest of the information was obtained through deathbed confessions, people who are in the military who are now retired and no longer afraid of their careers, people that have been in hiding because they were scared of what the men in black might do to them and they feared for their lives, new witnesses re-interviewed after 50 years, testimony that was given to Dr. John Mack, who wrote a great book on abductions and has interviewed hundreds of people that have been abducted and done thousands of interviews on people that have done sightings. So he was involved in several of the stories in the book, with him coming in and interviewing the witnesses, and I added that to the credibility of the story because he did find them very compelling and that they were telling the truth, at least in his mind. Other information is release of government documents that are no longer classified. I also was able to obtain some leaked documents from whistleblowers and others, and then try to put it in an order of sightings, then landings, abductions, and breaking the categories down.
Well, and for people who are listening, the book that we are speaking with, best-selling Amazon author Ken Sylvester, his book is We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof. So we do recommend that you purchase that book so that you can follow along with the conversations we'll be having in the book club that Ken and I are offering on our two books. Ken, I want to jump from your book for a moment to my book for a moment, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials. And the reason is you brought up Dr. John Mack and how you felt he was a credible psychiatrist who had interviewed people who had been abducted. And then I told you that I was one of the people, my parents were some of the people who were interviewed by Dr. John Mack. And that is part of what's in my book, A Conversation with Extraterrestrials. So as people are listening to this podcast, you're going to see the fluidity of experiences that both Ken has had and I have had. So I want to bring the story back even further to how you're talking about your expertise and your research and how you've consolidated the information in this incredible book that when people purchase it, they're not going to be able to put it down, and they're definitely going to want to follow our conversations. But Ken, you and I had another similar experience, and that is that we were both either abducted or had a sighting when we were young, and how we were treated around that was completely different. So would you go back and talk about what you speak about in the beginning of your book, We're Not Alone, about your experience with your friend?
Yes. I was a teenager, 14 years old. I was out playing basketball with my best friend, Mike Fagan, and all of a sudden we noticed in the sky behind us that there was a UFO. This lasted for a couple minutes, and then, like in many of the cases, it sped off at incredible speed, supersonic speed. It was gone, and it was silent, and there was no sonic boom. I called the local newspaper, the Macomb Daily, which is in Macomb County here in Michigan. They wrote the story the next day. Also the next day, I had someone from the Air Force, from Selfridge Air Force Base, which is not far, about 10 miles from my house, come out and interview me and also my friend Mike. It appeared that they were trying to see just how much that we had really saw. Mike and I don't remember much these days exactly what we saw that day, and apparently we convinced the Air Force guy that we were not a threat. Then recently, while I was researching the book, a story did come on about a month after I put the book out, and it was a story about the pilot that chased that UFO that day. And he was dispatched from Selfridge Air Force Base. I did not know this, and they also confirmed there were 30 other witnesses that day, but it all got buried. Back to the pilot, he waited 50 years to tell his story, and he felt compelled to tell us what happened. He was dispatched to chase this UFO. By the time he got up in the sky and started to chase it, it was gone.
So keep going.
Yeah. So that was confirmation for me. And when I told my friend Mike, he seemed a bit surprised also, because he wasn't sure his memory recall from the day, as far as getting details of the UFO we saw, neither of us could recall very much. So it got buried in our memory banks. But the confirmation from the guy at Selfridge Air Force Base led to me believe that, yes, I definitely really did experience seeing a UFO.
So you and Mike must have had some concept of what a UFO was, since when you saw it, you knew that that's what it was.
Yes, definitely. It was something that as teenagers we had talked about. There weren't as many shows out then as there are now, because this is going back to 1966. But that year in Michigan, there were a lot of sightings. It was an increased time for UFOs in Michigan. So this was just one of several stories that had been going on here up in Michigan during 1966.
Well, this is very, very compelling. And also, I'm just shocked that not only did you see a UFO, but you had the nerve to contact a local newspaper and get it written up, and they actually wrote it up like they respected you enough to talk about UFOs. That is so the opposite of what my friend and I experienced, which I'm not going to talk about today because I want to get to some other things with you, Ken. But this is just astounding. And in the flow of this, I think you have said to me that when a person thinks they see a UFO, is that something called an observable?
The observables are 6 conditions that was set up by Lou Elizondo, who had been working for the government in kind of a new project that replaced Project Blue Book. He was in charge, and theirs was just like Project Blue Book, to deny the story and then come up with a good cover story. So they had developed 6 observables that for a UFO to qualify as a UFO and being a possible non-human UFO, because the observables, even if we had the technology to do what some of them did, our human bodies couldn't withstand the G-force that we require to do the maneuvers. So they knew that if it fell into the category of one of these 6 observables, and some of them hit the mark on 3 or 4 different marks of the 6. So that's what they determined then was a legitimate UFO. Even though they changed it to UAP. But do you know that most of those stories going back 50, 60 years, they still are not able to identify them. So they still are unidentified flying. So they still identify them as UFOs.
Wow. And so, did you just say what those 6 observables are, what the criteria are?
No. Robin, would you like to hear the 6 observables?
Yes, I would, because I get so overwhelmed listening to you. I'm so intrigued. My brain kind of fries up. And not fries up, but just sort of, I don't know what. But anyway, that's why sometimes I'm going to ask you to repeat things or ask you if you've actually done something, is because I am just so fascinated with the subject. I get a little goofy. So please forgive me on that, Ken. But could you please tell us what the 6 observables are, so that when people start looking up into the sky, they'll know what those 6 observables are, and then they can start calling into our show and letting us know what they're seeing.
Okay. The first one is anti-gravity. That means the ability of a craft to fly without means of propulsion. So there would be no trails and no exhaust like you see from when you look up in the sky and see that white trail from an airplane. That is totally missing because the propulsion system they're using is beyond our current technology. The second one is instantaneous acceleration. This is the ability of the craft to reach a high rate of speed in a short period of time, like from 0 to 20,000 miles per hour in 1 second. Number 3 is the hypersonic, or the ability of the craft to reach speeds of over 3,700 miles per hour, which is 5 times the speed of sound when it exceeds Mach 5. The 4th is low observability. This is the ability of the craft to conceal itself from radar, either by stealth flying under the radar or using cloaking.
Wow.
The 5th one is called transmedium. This is the ability of the craft to seamlessly move through space, air, and water. Can fly in and out of water without changing speeds. The 6th one is the biological effects. This is the ability of the craft or its occupants to affect the health of the humans it comes in contact with. The crafts have been known to affect both humans and mechanical devices, such as electrical devices, where they're totally drained of power, or the compass won't point true north, it just spins. So if they have any one of these 6, they are probably dealing with a non-human ship.
And who composed this list of observables?
This was done by Lou Elizondo,
Okay.
who was the head of the government agency that replaced Project Blue Book, and they were brought about. It was called AATIP, which was Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, and they used this guide to identify spacecraft and other flying objects that defy our laws of physics as we currently know them.
So this is a government program funded by taxes that have done the research to come up with these 6 observables and are letting people know that if we look up in the sky and we see something that has even one of these, we're probably seeing a UFO. Is that accurate?
Definitely, and so much so that Lou Elizondo quit shortly after this from AATIP because they would not tell the truth. And he felt compelled. He became a whistleblower. He's had many death threats in public. He wears a bulletproof vest because he fears for his life. That he came out and told the truth and quit AATIP.
Well, speaking of that, Ken, you put together quite a potent book that if anyone reads it, they're going to know we're not alone, and that you do have a compilation of stories that do define the proof. So why are you not afraid to come out and speak like this?
Well, let's not say that I'm not afraid. There is a feel factor there. In fact, my neighbor who helped edit the book, and also him and I would talk on a daily basis about a recent story that was on, that we both saw that was on UFOs. And I asked him to watch out if any black cars show up at my house, or the black SUVs. Most of these stories have been out. They're printed in books. The same or similar information minus the updates that I have, but they wanted these stories to die. They really don't like them coming back up again. And I'm not sure that people that would normally be in power to do something about this, I don't think they've read my book yet. So until that gets into those hands, then maybe I'll change if I get some type of threat or some type of indication that they don't want me to pursue selling my book.
Okay, so you've thought that through as well. So I think what we need to do is probably type up what these 6 observables are, and then have them as show notes for this podcast, so that people can, refer back to that, and certainly they can re-listen to the podcast. And we do invite people to start looking up, see if you're going to see any ships. We are going to be having ongoing conversations about this. Again, Ken Sylvester's book, Amazon #1 bestseller, It's called We're Not Alone and Here's the Proof. You can find it on Amazon by putting in his name, Ken Sylvester, We're Not Alone and Here's the Proof. My book is A Conversation with Extraterrestrials, and it is by Robin Alexis. We're not going to talk about my book today because I want to just finish up a little bit more here with my dear friend Ken. Ken, is there any parting thing you'd like to say to people before we close out the first episode here?
Well, I think that once they read the book, any one of these stories is compelling enough to prove that we have definitely been visited by aliens, by non-humans, because of the biological effects and also from the observables, definitely proven that these could not be that humans are not flying these spacecraft.
Okay. And so based on what you just said, I would like for people, after you purchase the book, kind of feel into it and look at the different chapters and kind of intuitively pick which chapter you want to read first. You want to read it from front to back or back to front, but kind of vibe into it. And then let us know what you were compelled to read, and we will start picking podcast subjects that maybe we'll even bring you on as a guest while we're talking about that particular chapter. That would be really fun, don't you think, Ken?
That sounds like a great plan, Robin.
All right. So thank you for listening to Mystic Radio with Robin Alexis and my very special guest, Ken Sylvester. We will be letting you know when the next show will air. And in that one, so far, we think we're going to be discussing Roswell. So for those of you who don't even know what Roswell is, get the book, read the chapter, and join us for that conversation. And if you want to visit my website, robinalexis.com, you'll have lots of fun things there. We have blogs, memberships, and I offer other services. Thank you for listening. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye, Ken.
Bye now, Robin. Robin, you still there?